Hi, I'm Pat Keegan and welcome back to the DIY Home Build channel. In this short video, we're going to go ahead and complete the construction of the leftmost base cabinet in our kitchen project. In the previous two videos, I've talked extensively about the modifications that need to be done to this cabinet to fit over the radiant baseboard heater that we didn't take into account when we first did the design and dimensioning of the kitchen itself. In the last video, toward the very end, we already constructed the face frame for this cabinet. The cabinet is 14.5 inches wide, and the cabinet itself will be 34.5 inches tall, which is standard dimensioning for kitchen cabinets, the base cabinets. We already went ahead and assembled our face frame with the same pocket hole joinery that we're going to be using to put all of the pieces of our base cabinet together exactly the same way that we did for the upper cabinets that we've already made in the previous videos. In this particular cabinet, there's 8 total pieces to cut of plywood. I'm going to have 2 sides, 2 stretchers, 3 back pieces, and a bottom shelf. So it's 8 total pieces. I've already gone ahead and made the cut list, which I showed you in the last video, and we're ready to get started. As usual, I take our longer sheets of plywood. In this case, I'm going to have 1 cherry piece of plywood that's going to be on the exposed side of the kitchen where people will see it. And I've got another panel which is going to butt up against the stove on the right side, so I'm going to use the pre-finished maple plywood for that. I've sandwiched these 2 pieces together. I've already measured 34.5 inches from the bottom of the cabinet up, and I've gone ahead and installed the jig that I use with my circular saw in order to make these cuts most efficiently. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and make the rest of the cuts to fine-tune the width, which is 23.25 inches, on the table saw. So with that, let's get started. Okay, I've got the 2 side pieces cut now to their rough dimension. One is the piece of cherry, which is going to face the inside of the kitchen that I'm going to see, and the other one is made out of the pre-finished maple plywood, which will be butt up against the stove, and we won't see that, so that's fine. All of the rest of the cuts, plus truing these up to their final dimension, I'll do on the table saw. I have plenty of scrap left over from other work that I've done, so that I can have a bunch of these smaller type pieces which are much more manageable on the table saw than are the half size or the full size sheets. One thing I want to mention about your table saw setup, I've already got the saw set up for 23.25 inches, which is going to be the final dimension needed for these pieces of plywood for the cabinet sides, but I don't want to keep changing my table saw setup around. Fortunately, when I made my cut list, I realized that all of the width of the other 6 pieces that I need to cut is the same at 13 inches. So after I cut the 2 pieces at 23.25, I'll move the saw to 13 inches and cut all the rest of the widths of the 6 remaining pieces at that time. The good thing about doing it like that at the same time is that, one, it's faster. You're not changing setups on the table saw and having to remeasure and cut test pieces just to make sure you're okay. But it's more efficient for putting the cabinet together. If I cut all of the pieces that need the same width at the same time, I'm absolutely assured that the width will be exactly the same. Even if it's a little bit off, let's say I messed up and it's 12 and 15/16 instead of 13 inches, at least they'll all be 12 and 15/16 inches, and when I assemble the cabinet, I'll have a little bit to take off the edge of a face frame. But the fact that all of the widths are the same is going to make it putting together much easier. So I'm going to turn to the table saw now, and I'm going to finish cutting all of the other 6 pieces, plus truing up these 2 boards, and when I come back, we'll start to put this cabinet together by drilling the pocket holes and then screwing everything together before we attach the face frame. Alright, I've got all my pieces cut now. I've got the 2 side pieces. Alright, I've got all my pieces cut now that I'm going to need to assemble this cabinet. I've got my 2 side pieces that you can see here for the 2 side panels of the cabinet. And then over here, I've got all the other pieces, the top, the bottom, the 3 back pieces, plus the 2 stretchers and the toe kick. And the first thing I'm going to do now, though, is cut the notch for the toe kick on both pieces, as well as the notch in the back of the cabinet to go over our radiant baseboard heater, which I talked about previously. So I've already got the 2 pieces stacked on top of each other for the sides. When you do this, if you're going to cut both pieces at the same time, make sure, like in our case, I'm using 2 different sheets of plywood, so one's going to be visible, one's not. Make sure you have them stacked on top of each other in the way where the toe kick notches align. Otherwise, you'll have one facing the back and one facing the front. So I'm going to go ahead and notch that out. I've already got my jig. Even though this is a small cut, I am going to be using a circular saw just in case people don't have a jigsaw. I do happen to have a jigsaw, but for this one it's going to be faster. I'm going to basically use the jig, make the notch, and then flip the jig around to do the notch out of the back so that we can go over our baseboard heater. One thing I wanted to point out was that always make sure the saw is unplugged when you do this. But one thing I wanted to point out is the blade is curved. So this topmost part where the blade is going to meet the base of the saw, that's going to be where I'm going to stop exactly on my line. And since I'm already cutting the face piece of the cabinet, that's the part that's going to be visible. Underneath that, obviously the blade curves back toward me, so there's going to be some material left underneath that's going to have to be cut away by hand or with the jigsaw so I can get the notch to be perfectly 90 degrees. It's not a big deal. Let me get this plugged in and my safety equipment on, and we'll cut the notches. Alright, now I've got the toe kick notch in both pieces of the sides, and I've got the back notch cut out to go over the baseboard heater. The next step in assembly of this cabinet is to go back and repeat the process that we've done in previous videos. On the inside of the cabinet, I'm going to drill a series of pocket holes here, only on the front, in order to receive the face frame for the cabinet. All the other pieces will have similar holes in order to anchor everything together. And I'll go through these really pretty quickly here. This is the first back piece that'll be at the highest part of the cabinet and touch the top of the cabinet. So I'm going to drill pocket holes here on both sides of this piece. This is the bottom shelf in the cabinet, which is going to be have pocket holes on all 4 sides, so that I can anchor the shelf into the sides of the cabinet, as well as the back piece of the cabinet here and the front piece. The 2 stretchers that we're going to have, they're going to sit inside the cabinet flush with the top to lend some stability and square to the cabinet, as well as have a place, if you were to put a laminate countertop on, you could drill up through these, but we're not going to be doing that in this kitchen. But anyway, on the back piece, I'll drill a couple holes in the sides and a couple holes in the back to anchor it to the back of the cabinet and the sides of the cabinet. And on the front stretcher, I'll just do the same thing. I'll do it on 3 sides, and then the front side will be used to anchor into the face frame of the cabinet. I'll do the same piece here for the underside of the notch that I showed you in the previous video. We're just going to put a couple of pocket holes along each side to hold the thing in there. It's not really a stability piece or something that's structurally important, so it just has a few holes to keep it square. And then again for the bottom piece, which is recessed into the cabinet from the notch, and again I talked about this in the video as well, the last video where I used the SketchUp. We're going to just put some of the holes here in the 2 sides. So I'll get started on this. I've got my pocket hole jig here. I'll get that set up, and then I'll get all the pocket holes drilled, and then we'll come back for some assembly. Okay, all of the pieces that I need to construct the cabinet now have their pocket holes drilled in them, so we can begin some assembly. On a cabinet this narrow, usually at this point what I'll do is I will try to attach any drawer hardware like the slides and the brackets that we're going to be using to anchor the slides to the back of the cabinet now, rather than waiting until after this cabinet is assembled. Simply because of the fact that the cabinet is only 14 inches wide, it's 14 and a half, so it's a pretty narrow cabinet, and once I have these pieces together like so and the cabinet's assembled, it's going to be a little tight in here to work comfortably. However, unfortunately, the brackets that I ordered haven't come in yet, and we've got to kind of get this cabinet assembled together so that we can get some stain on it. So we're just going to have to put up with it, and that is what happens sometimes. So the way I'm going to assemble this cabinet is starting with the back piece first. And the reason I do that is because it's the easiest one to get at and make sure that it's all together before I start putting in the other pieces. What I've done is, I know that the back piece, this back piece, has to be recessed in from the back of the cabinet 1/4 of an inch. The easiest way to do this is to just cut a 1/4 inch piece of scrap, which I have here, and set it down, and then lay the back side of the cabinet on top of it, so that I'll know that I have a 1/4 inch gap recessed between the back edge of the cabinet and the back panel. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flush the top up. Okay, this needs to be flush with the top of the cabinet. And then I'm going to take the face frame clamp. It's not really a face frame clamp, it's a pocket hole clamp with a barrel on the right end, or your left, my right. And then I'm going to go ahead and tuck that in and lock it into place so that it holds itself, and I'm ready to put some pocket screws in. It's still flush at the top, so that's fine. And then what I'm going to do is just put everything in. Okay, with the back on, the first back piece on, and the two sides connected all together, now what I'm going to do is go ahead and just put one of the stretchers in. If I have to remove one of these stretchers to get another piece, or if it's too uncomfortable to work at, I can always do that. You can see that the stretchers have 2 pocket holes on each side to go into the side of the cabinet, and then 3 pocket holes at one end, which will either go to the back of the cabinet or to the face frame of the cabinet, as we've said before. So this one I'm just going to put in to the side of the cabinet, and you can see it fits nice and snug. I'll put this one in the back first, and that'll tie everything together. Okay, as you can see, I've got the 2 stretchers in. Now I'm going to put the second back piece on. So I'll flip the cabinet over. And here's the back piece. Again, it doesn't matter which way the holes face because this is going to be a drawer. So I'm going to actually face these inside just to match the other side that I did already. And if you remember, this back piece has to be flush with the bottom of the cabinet. Which it is. And it's got to be recessed in 3/4 of an inch, because remember there's going to be a piece of drywall that's 1/2 inch thick that's going to go here to protect the heat. And all I'm going to do is measure in 3/4 of an inch at both ends. And we'll be okay. Then what I'm going to do is double check my measurement. Good. Make sure the bottom is flush because I don't want to bounce with the cabinet or anything like that. Take this in. Lock it in. And just set the screws. Alright, now that the 2 back pieces are on, I need this third back piece, which we drilled, which is just going to slip in here. And I'll do that from the inside because it's starting to get a little bit snug. I could have put this one on last, which is fine. But this is just, again, to kind of give it a little bit of protection from the heat and keep heat from getting in the cabinet when it's kind of over this cabinet. But then I'll get this piece in, and then we'll be ready to attach the bottom shelf, then the face frame. Now that I have all three back pieces anchored into place, it's time to install the bottom shelf. For this one, I actually am going to have these pocket holes facing down towards the floor because no one's ever going to be able to get under there to look at them. And then it's going to simply slide in like so. It's a good snug fit because we've tightened up all the other pieces that are going to go around it. And I have to remember that when I go to put the face frame on, I want to make sure that this shelf's top side doesn't protrude past this top side of the bottom rail. And so in order to do that nicely, I can just go ahead and measure up 2 inches from the bottom of this notch. So I'll do that now. And I'll just put a little witness mark here to make sure that I don't go past it. And that way I'll know when the front of the shelf, top shelf is there, then it'll be okay. Now that I have all the cabinet pieces put together using the pocket screws, it's time to go ahead and assemble our face frame on top of it. If you remember, on the underside of the cabinet, we've got holes drilled here in the underside to receive the bottom of the face frame. In the stretcher, we drilled holes to receive the top of the face frame, and on the inside of the cabinet, we've drilled holes to receive the sides of it. Since this cabinet is a little bit custom, we've got one half that'll be facing the stove and this half that'll be facing out into the kitchen. I want to go ahead and make sure that my face frame is nice and flush against this side of the cabinet so that there's no lip here at all. And on this side, if there's a little bit of an overhang, that's okay. If you're really, want to be kind of anal about it, you can always get a flush laminate trimmer bit and take a router and just, or a hand planer even, and get this thing flush too. But since it's facing the stove, I can already feel there's maybe like a 32nd of an inch overhang. It's perfectly fine to have that. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I always use a little bit of glue here on that. I know I'm just kind of a stickler about that kind of stuff. I don't put glue on these sides because it won't stick, because this stuff is slippery. It's already pre-finished maple on that. So I know that that's going to be okay though, because I certainly put a lot of screws in there. And then, but when you have, bare wood to bare wood contact where there's no finish on it, I always try to use a little bit of glue. If you get any bleed out, get it off right away with a wet rag so that it's not going to get into the pores of the wood and leave you with these nice yellow spots in the middle of your deep, rich mahogany or cherry stain, whatever you're using. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and glue this up. I'm going to set it in, and then I'm just going to use all the pocket screws that we've been doing so far. Now that I have the face frame fully attached, I'm just going to take a damp rag and get all this glue off so that I don't get any yellow spots poking through here. Well, there you have it. Our base cabinet for the leftmost cabinet that we have in our kitchen is now complete. I'm going to take a very light 150 to 220 grit sandpaper. I do have a little random orbit sander that I use, and I'm just going to make sure that all of these things on the face frame are flush. Usually I sand them after it's made, but this time I just chose to do it when it was attached to the cabinet. Again, I just want to make sure that there's no glue visible here and that these things are all very flush and smooth. That really is a sign of a professional job, is if your seams are very smooth and there's no bumps or anything in it. So I'll make sure that these are all sanded down, that the edges are sanded in, and just to make sure we give it a quick once over. Be very careful when you are sanding veneered plywood. It's very easy to burn right through the very thin, probably 32nd of an inch layer or thinner It's very easy to burn through that with sandpaper, so just be very careful when you go over that with your sander. So once that's done, then it's ready for stain, and I'm going to get it all stained out. The next time, hopefully, I'll be able to show you how we're going to put in the drawers and the drawer slides particularly. The type of slide that we're going to be using is just a full extension bearing slide, so it's not going to be undermount. I've used the undermount system before, and I will post videos of how to put them in, how to measure for them, how to install them. They're very nice. They've got a very nice self-close mechanism that's really good, but they're really expensive compared to the bearing slides. And when you've got 12 or 16 sets of drawers, that can make a couple of $100 worth of difference. And so we're not going to do that. We're just going to be installing the bearing-based slides, full extension bearing slides. That requires a ½ inch of space on either side of our drawer box. So I'll talk about that next time when we go to put the drawers in. And I'm also going to attach them to the face frame. I'm not going to build out the cabinet insides to be able to just screw them into the sides of the cabinet, because these are obviously not European cabinets. They're more the traditional ones. And then I'll use a bracket, an L bracket that comes with the hinges, or you can order separately, that will anchor it to the back. So I'll show you all of that and how we're going to measure for the drawers and installing the drawers in the next video. Alright, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching. Post any comments that you have below or ask any questions. I'd be very happy to clarify. And thanks again for tuning into the DIY Home Build channel.